our wrap up.
Is we understand the struggle is, it's an ongoing, there's not a right way. There's a lot of wrong ways, but
You only fail if you quit.
and you're not alone.
You're not. Good morning. Welcome to the Dad Experience. My name is Steven. And
My name is Dustin. It's good that you guys are back. If you haven't watched the first episode, go check it out. I think we butchered through a conversation or two, but no, I think it was good. We talk a little bit more about our backstories in that, but we're glad that you're back. What do we got today?
yeah, well, so, we wanted to kind of just go through all of, there's not enough time for that actually, but
There's never enough time. Our wives are sleeping right now, and we need to be home.
that gives us the flexibility to be here this morning. So I mean, as far as conversation and topics for today, we're wanting to kind of build these episodes based off of kind of starting from our bar mitzvahs and then kind of moving through life, and incorporating the book of Proverbs into these conversations. And so wanted to kind of just ask if there was anything that like stood out to you this week since the first episode, that especially since that conversation. Was there anything that like you felt or maybe noticed yourself looking at things differently when you got home?
Yeah, because that's what we talked.
Interactions with your children, anything.
We did talk about that. We talked. Yeah, the last episode we talked about how can we have energy after a day of work to go home to give to our family. I definitely tried it. I definitely thought about that, and I definitely tried. Some days this week has been really hard because whenever there's a kid's birthday, planning for all of that, the planning for making sure the house is clean, everything, because family.
Oh yeah.
So and then we're going on a trip next week, so it's like trying to juggle everything. Sometimes the kids get pushed to the side. Just go watch something.
Yeah. Go build some Legos.
Go build. Yeah. But, and it is hard because, I see myself, my one kid's at this stage where he wants me to, play with him, and he comes up with things. And I find myself saying, after this. You know what I mean? I'm trying to be more mindful, to make sure, one, that it is after that if I am busy. Or two, try to just do it then, so he doesn't, because I don't want my kids to grow up and saying, he's always busy.
Yeah.
He's always doing something.
Sure.
And so there's a hard juggle there.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's a balance. I mean, for me as a dad, I think that there's a balance in how I've tried to view those things, because specifically when it comes to work, right? And my son's younger than yours, but it's one of those things where I want him to see me working, and I want him to see the commitment that I've made to that, and it not be described to him as a negative, right? Now, for my daughter, if I have any, right, it'll be a totally different conversation, right? But for my son specifically, anything to do with time invested in work, it's well, this is what us guys do, right? We go out and we conquer. We go out and we create, right? And I'm not saying that girls can't do that, but
Sure.
All of the testosterone and the energy that us guys have inside of us, just biologically, right? It's we have that energy, to go out there and do these things. So, I'm really talking with my wife about that because, I do work sometimes some crazy hours,
Sure.
and I might go a day where I left the house at 5 o'clock in the morning and didn't get home until 7:30, 8 o'clock
Sure.
at night. And my son's pretty much, crawling into bed when I
Yeah.
come home. So I literally get to see him for, maybe 20 minutes that day. Right. And so it's also challenged me in a same sense of well, if I'm going to be away from my family, it better be productive. It better be the best use of that time.
Sure.
Or else I shouldn't be away from my family, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure.
I know I definitely went through kind of the same thought processes after our last episode of just kind of thinking through like everything that we, talked about, and was like, okay, does my life really align with those things? That was kind of my first thought, right?
It's easy to fake it.
Yeah.
Fake it. It's easy to say it and not do it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I asked my wife too. I was like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I expect you, if there's things that I'm saying on this podcast that there isn't alignment in our life and you can't see those things, I was like, I do expect you to call me out on that.
Sure.
I was like, to me, that's the only way that this podcast is going to accomplish what I want it to accomplish for my life, for me personally, right? Like, cause I don't want to just be on this thing talking and saying all of these, they sound great in theory, right? But there's no application behind it. Sure. There's no, hey, like, where does the rubber meet the road? Like, I want to test these things out. This is a journey for me cause my son's only 17 months. So a lot of these concepts, a lot of these things that we're talking about, there are still theories, in my life, right? Sure. Like, you've been able to apply and like you have some time, right? Like, I'm like just like it's all on paper almost still,
No, for sure. I mean, for me, like, I struggle, like, you were talking about how you want to see your kid work, and you want to see your kid see you work.
Yeah.
And man, it's a struggle for me because I almost died.
Sure.
Like, the thing is, it's like, what do I, like, I don't know, the older I get and the almost dying part, literally, is like, work is always going to be there.
It is.
Work, people are always like this, work will always be there. And so, like, I want to teach my kids, the boys that I have, that yes, you do have to work and you do have to provide, and there is a time for that. But there's a time for the more important things, because your kids are the most important, like, especially in that age.
Sure.
And they're growing up, and I try to live my life like, what do I want my kids to think of, like the description of who I am when they become teenagers, when they become young men, when they become fathers. And so, like, my last night, my one kid was like, "You're always mean to mommy." You know what I mean? Like, says that, like, like, why? And I'm not gonna go into why. And it's not like I'm not yelling at her. I'm not like hitting her. I'm not like, but I annoy her. You know what I mean? There's a lot of annoying that goes along.
Oh yeah.
Like, so
like teasing.
Yeah,
like
touching and like just you know what I mean.
You know exactly what to say.
Yeah.
To so just like make her.
Yeah. So like it's just a lot of like. But like, your kids are watching you, the things that you're doing every single day, and so. But I want to make sure that I'm continually taking time, so that work isn't the main priority. Because, like when you do have a life, life death experience.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You start viewing things way different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You start saying, you know what? Maybe that extra hour of work isn't worth it. That extra.
Sure.
Because it's like, but yeah, it's a hard balance, for sure. Because you want to teach your kids, like, and my kids will do this a lot. They'll jump on my computer and I'll be like, get off my computer, and they'll be like, I got to do work. That's what they'll say. Nice. You know what I mean?
Nice.
They'll continually say, there's some mornings like my little, like Thaddeus will run out in his pajamas, no shoes on. I'm coming with you. Like, I love you so much, but you can't come with me. Especially,
you have to have shoes on.
Yeah, especially, and he'll start running back in again. I'm like, no. I was like, no, I'm going to take you one day. I promise.
Yeah.
But my kids, like, they're at 4 years old. Now, the other one's 6, but then the one who just turned 1 yesterday, but Thaddeus, his attention span isn't there yet. You know what I mean? Like, if he came with me, I feel like he would just get bored super fast. And like, but I've also thought about, like, even if he does get bored, even if I sat him on an iPad to watch something for a little while, just being with me, the struggle is that, like, when one wants to go, the other one wants to go, and that is if you ever brought 2 kids, you already know if you have 2 kids, but there's constant, most of the time you're there, it's like being at home. Stop fighting with each other. Leave each other alone.
Yeah.
You know, the oldest, it's just like the oldest in the middle. The oldest wants to annoy as much as possible, and this one wants to be alone, and it's a process.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask you, so when you first found out that you were going to have a baby, right?
We're talking about the very first one, or are we talking about the...
It could be like you could pull from both, right? Like you might be able to answer this question from both, right? When you first found out, like, okay, I've got a baby on the way, right? Like, what was like your initial thoughts of like, I'm gonna be a dad? Like, what were maybe some goals, right? Like, help us like walk through that, like that initial reaction, right? Like, what did you think? What was like your next 5 steps that you thought through, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I mean, so I don't. Did we talk about how many kids we had last? I
think so. I think yeah. If not,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So I mean, I have 4 kids. I have a daughter who's 23, about to be 24. So I had her when I was in high school, and I wasn't married. I didn't get married to that girl.
To her mother.
To her mother, yeah.
Got it.
And so now I have 3 boys, and I am married. So it's a healthy relationship. I would like to say it's a healthy relationship. Maybe not. I don't know.
Right?
No, but
we'll see what she says.
Yeah. So when I had my very first one when I was in high school, I'm trying to think because that was a long time ago. So it was. Man, if you're watching this and you have a kid in high school or you had a kid really young,
yeah,
you understand. Like I tried, I remember trying to shape my life up better. I mean, I ended up dropping out of high school, so I don't know if that made it better. But I tried to be there.
School doesn't determine your trajectory.
No, you're right. But I tried to get it. I mean, I remember I think I was already working, but I tried to work. I tried to provide. It was a hard time, and when you're 17 years old.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have a kid. Like life is. I mean, you're depending on everybody. Yeah. Like it's not easy. So, but I think I wanted to do better. I think I tried to make my life better at the time. I would like to say that I tried to. That whole situation was a mess. Sure. I mean, when you have a kid that young, I mean, you have no control. Especially if you're a guy in that situation, you have zero control of the situation. Like you really, if you have a kid out of wedlock, the guys have like little to no control. You know what I mean? Especially in Illinois for sure. But when you're that young, you don't have no job. You have no. I mean, you're not making money. You're depending on your parents. You're depending on her parents. So, but not with this with our first child in the marriage. I mean, it's definitely a shift in mindset, but I probably did something that you probably shouldn't do. So, like, Laura was a counselor at a high school. She had her master's counselor. She got pregnant, and she said, "I want to be a stay-at-home mom."
And just for clarification, Laura is Dustin's wife.
Oh, yes.
There you go. I don't think you've ever introduced her, so I just wanted to clarify. Yeah. So Laura is Dustin's wife.
So she gets pregnant. She wants to be a stay-at-home mom. I think I'm pastoring a church at this time, and I'm an assistant, or I'm just a regular T-Mobile employee, just for a job. And she says, "I want to be a stay-at-home mom," and I'm just like, "Well, if we can make it work, we'll make it work."
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I was like, "Well, I'm not going to be able to stay in this position, like, because you make all the money." You know what I mean? Like. Yeah. So I became kind of an assistant pastor. I became an assistant at T-Mobile. I moved up because I was like, I need to work full time because I was just part time at that time.
Like an assistant manager.
Yeah, assistant manager. Found a store, shifted to there, and then she has the baby, and then we both quit our jobs.
Okay.
We both quit our jobs, have the baby, both quit our jobs, and I did Uber. This was like 2018, 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. So I did Uber full time, and really it was just how much time can I spend at home? Because like I guess maybe my first child I didn't get that because with being in high school and being in the whole situation, and that's a whole story in itself. But being able to spend as much time with Theo as much as possible, and it all worked out. It worked out for the better. But I definitely just try to spend again. It always comes down to time with me.
Yeah,
time is always like more important than anything else.
Okay, so like your goals moving into your 3 newest babies, right? What were do you have any kind of goals that you've maybe put down on paper that like maybe you and Laura have come together and said, hey, like this is what if there's anything that we succeed as parents, this is what we want to ensure we teach our children, or the example we want to be, or something like that, anything like that.
So I don't know if we wrote down anything. I think it's probably just more like we just understand that when we want our kids to know Jesus, we want our kids to be a mature Christian. We want them to be involved in church in some kind of way, and to go to church. So, I mean, sometimes goals are a funny thing because, and that goal is obvious, but like other goals, it's hard because sometimes they just get lost. You just get lost in the mix. I mean, like of raising your kids, going home, the energy is low. It's easy to just get to a point where you're just trying to survive every day.
Yeah,
and that's always a struggle. I don't know if this trip is going to help or not. Probably not. No, but I mean, like
it will challenge you.
When you're raising 3 kids, I mean, the constant, like, every day is an adventure. Every day is, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to keep things in order. So, like, never, if you're watching this, you're not failing if your house isn't clean one day. You know what I mean? Or
right.
Like, the thing is like...
I think that's a way easier thing for us guys to understand.
Oh, no, it's 100% easier.
Like...
we went through this last night. Laura said, I wish you could just see what I see. And I'm like, in my mind, it's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, but to the wife, they want there's a certain level of like appearance, I guess.
Oh yeah.
And so
I think that it's almost attached to some of their value, like their worth as a woman, right?
Sure.
Like their domain is essentially like the home. So, especially for a stay-at-home mom, right? Like everything that she's probably thinks that her value comes from, or some of her value comes from, right, is how clean her home is, right? How well her home is presented to others, which is also a really interesting thing,
Because for me, I'm like, honey, I don't. For me, it's always, I don't care. But she doesn't understand that.
Probably drives her crazy, that
100%.
response of, I don't care, right?
It drives
but
her.
For us, because I feel very similar to you in the sense that it's like, hey, like, is it functional, right? Like, are we hoarders? Like, you know what I mean? Like, can we walk in every room? Can we see the floor, right?
Not when you have 3 kids.
Is there cockroaches, right? Like, that's, to me, I'm more worried about, like, the bugs, right? Like, are we clean enough to keep, all of the insects out of our house? We are? We don't even have an ant problem? Sweet. I think we're doing great, babe. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I view the cleanliness of the house, But she's like, there's a dirty dish inside the sink. I'm like, well, but it's inside the sink. Like, what do you mean? Like, where's it gonna go? Is it gonna grow legs and like walk out the door? Or, like, what are you worried about?
She probably doesn't want to hear that.
Oh no, no.
Those are fighting words.
Yes. She's like, well, you can walk out the door
with the plate.
With the plate, yeah. You can take the plate with you if you're not gonna put it in the dishwasher.
No.
That's definitely the dynamics of men and women, right?
Yeah.
I think so. One of my sisters. When I first found out that I was going to be a father, and it was going to be I was going to be a father to a boy, I was kind of freaking out because I had a certain example of what a father could look like, right, through my dad, but there was a lot of things in that relationship that I was like, I don't know if I would necessarily want to duplicate and pass on to my son. And my sister was just like, well, at the end of the day, he's probably not going to listen too much to what you have to say. So she's like, just figure out what kind of example you want to be. because he's going to learn way more from you through your example
Sure.
than what you say. And that just like, when she said that to me, like it just like was like a ton of bricks, you know what I mean? Just like falling on me. Like the responsibility that I felt was like, oh my God, like it was so insane. And then
Sure.
My wife and I, we were reading this book called The Wonder Weeks. I don't know the author of it, but it's a pretty popular book for, newborn babies and like teaching you what to expect and all of that.
Yeah.
And, just it was talking about how quickly the baby's brains are developing and how much they're learning on a daily basis. And getting to see my example being emulated, like, he's only 17 months, man. You know what I mean? And I'll literally do something and I'll look out of the corner of my eye and he is just dead watching every move that I'm making, And like that example just always is like, oh, like everything I do, everything I'm saying, right? The tones, the hand gestures, all of that stuff.
Everything.
He's watching, and learning from and deciding whether or not he wants to copy me or not, right? But yeah, that's I think the intentionality, whether you do this before your child is born or even after they're born, is really important. Life is very short, and kind of what you were talking about just a couple minutes ago is, when you've faced death a little bit closer than everybody else, because the reality is that we all face, statistically, we all face death pretty closely every day.
Probably.
Getting in your car, you gotta,
Sure.
I think it's 1 in 4,000. I think it's like 1 in 4,285, something like that. Probability of being hit in a car. So it's like, well, if there's more than 4,800 or 4,200 drivers on the road at any given time in your area, potentially, right?
Oh, 100%.
So like the likelihood of you being that one person that's going to get hit or hit by a car, like, statistically, we flirt with death every day.
Sure.
And so but because we flirt with death every day, it actually like deadens our senses to it in the reality that we're just that, we're that close. We're that, that's one step away from it potentially, right? And we should live according to that, I think. I think it creates a lot more intentionality in our lives.
Sure.
And gives us more focus. So that way it's like, because the work will always be there. And that example, I think, ties into teaching them how to prioritize their time. So have you ever seen the movie called King Richard? It's Will Smith is the main character.
We're talking about the tennis player.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about that. It's Serena and
Venus and Serena Williams.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the story of their dad, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of that movie's good. I like that movie.
I really enjoyed it. That was another that movie came out too, like not
right around that.
Yeah, it was like right when Jacob was born.
Yeah.
And I watched it and I just ate it up. And this would be for the audience. This is kind of just like a little poll. But do you think it's better? And this is just opinions, right? Do you think it's better for a child to live a very focused life with an end goal in mind, right? Where every day they're waking up, they're into that routine, right? Whether it's to play tennis or to play basketball or to build homes, even maybe, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different things that a person can focus on, right? But do you think it's better for them to live that focused life or live a life of exploration where they're just kind of meandering through it, trying new things, dabbling here, dabbling there? I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on that. Maybe leave some comments with, what you think.
Definitely. Yeah, because I mean, like that, when you see the part where you hear about that was his plan for his kids, like that's true story. Like I looked it up. Like before they were even born,
75-page report.
This is exactly what we're going to do. And that you're banking on a lot though, because like, I mean, the odds of your kids making it professionally, like in anything, like, the statistics is not there. So, because what if it didn't go that way? What if they didn't? Because like we know the outcome, right? We know that the outcome, they made it. They were famous. They were the top of their fields, and now they're able to live their life however they want to. But what if they? But that can easily, because I bet you there's a lot of fathers that try that.
Sure.
There's probably a lot of fathers who force their kids into things, and it doesn't always go the way. And their kids, all they can remember is how, like. But again, I mean, it's one of those things that you have to figure out as a dad for your child. You know, with that, like I like when we go places. I mean, even when my kids are young, I let them roam around as much as possible. Like while they're in my sight, right? Like I want them to explore. I want them to figure things out on their own.
That's healthy. It's good for them to learn different things in an environment, and
it's easier for dads, right? Like I mean, my kids will fight. My kids will fight all the time, and I'm like, let them beat each other up, you know. And Laura's like, I can't do that. I'm like they're brothers. Like, let them figure it out. Like, let them. Right. I mean, there does come a time where I'm like, okay, it's whatever, and like just because they'll go at it. They're at the point like I in trying. The hardest thing I think with kids is trying to walk them through their emotions. You know what I mean? Like, why did you feel the need? Like, but Thaddeus, the middle child, he goes from 0 to 100 right away. There is no in between. There's no gradual. It's happy. I'm super frustrated.
Sure.
And it comes out straight away. Theo, I mean, you can see his brain work up into that point, and then he's crying. And then I'm like, there's no reason. Like, why are we crying? There's no reason to cry about this little thing right here.
Sure.
It's not worth it. You're just frustrated and you're upset. Yeah, I think, I mean,
just to kind of tie back in with the King Richard film.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So yes. I think there's definitely some factors that were at play in that scenario that helped Venus and Serena see this as a viable path for them. And like even at a young age.
Sure.
And I think it boils down to the fact that both of their parents were tennis players.
And they enjoyed playing tennis. Like, I think they enjoyed it.
Well,
right?
but so like you think about it, right, from the perspective of like, okay, they have older siblings, and the mom and dad got very focused on their training specifically.
Sure.
And started playing tennis with them at a young age, right? Started taking them and teaching them, and it was very habitual. Right, there was set days of the week that we went and trained.
Yes,
and they also got to see that it was important to their father because of the sacrifices that he made with his time. Right, like how he chose to spend his time with them was also very intentional because he worked an overnight securities position. Right.
Yep.
The mom went to work during the day. The only times that he got to sleep was really once the kids were off or were at school, right? When they came back and, before school, he would take them to practice. After school, he would take them to practice. I mean, he was very involved. And I think that intentionality also towards the focus, because this is something that I think about all the time, right? Is like Jacob experienced things for the first time all the time.
Yeah, every day.
Right? He's experiencing something new.
Sure.
So whatever I introduce to him or whatever Heather introduces to him is something that if we said or if we exemplified, we did that every single day, he would grow up as that's just part of life. So like, yeah, it's one of those things where I think that you can be very intentional about how you structure a child's life.
Sure.
And they don't think anything differently until they probably hit, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know what I mean? Like they start having some friends, they are hanging out at their friends' houses, you know what I mean? Like until they really start getting to that age where they're socializing and they're getting to see how other children are raised and what their life looks like, do they really ever start any kind of comparison? But, as long as they're every day they're seeing that behavior, I think that it becomes a way of life. And hard work typically always beats talent.
Oh, yeah,
so
for sure.
There's a certain degree, too, to where even if your child isn't, naturally just gifted in whatever it is that you're trying to explore with them, teaching them a good work ethic is, I think, a really great foundation. And, in the movie, it shows, like, every night they would journal and they would write down their plan for the next day. I mean, from a business perspective, like CEOs and upper level management, they prioritize and they focus on their schedule and time management.
Sure.
Like if you don't get time management down, you will never get to a certain level in an organization, right? You just can't produce the same as somebody that has their calendar figured out and, running, right? Sure. So, those skills, to be able to teach them that at such a young age. Yeah.
No, I mean, they were destined to be, I mean, they were destined to do what they did.
Well, we all are destined to do what we do.
Sure. At different levels.
Yeah.
I mean,
which is a crazy thing to think about too. So I wanted to read a scripture verse that I think ties into kind of what we're talking about here. The goal that we have for our children, but I think also the paying attention to what we say and the example. So in Proverbs chapter 1, we're still in chapter 1 there, verse 8, it says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father and forsake not the law of thy mother." When I think of that, it's like it's protection. Right, it's giving your child a buffer to be able to try to navigate situations that you might not be around. Your mom might not be around. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, these are parameters for you to be able to function and be safe, and not forsaking the laws of our parents. Right, like understanding that that generational wisdom that can come down can save us time, it can save us pain, it can also uplift us, right? It can also take us further in life if we are paying attention to those things. And it was kind of funny because I was how I kind of stumbled across this thought process was I was sitting there, we were outside with Jacob and we were just kind of exploring, we were walking around, and I've been trying to teach him that there are times when you can go into the road and there's times when you can't go in the road, right? And so, because he loves to just
go into the road.
Yeah. And so I've been trying to teach him, hey, we don't go past this concrete sidewalk, basically, right? And like 80% of the time, he does great, right? I'll say, hey, son, we got to stay on the concrete. Don't go past the concrete. And he'll go over there. And it's really kind of funny because he'll take his feet, and I can see one of the feet like slowly like inching off the curb of the sidewalk. I know he's like fighting it like desperately because he's like, I just want to go. I just want to take that step. Just let me go, Dad. Hi. And I just told him, I was like, son, as long as you listen and obey, we can travel the world together and you can be free. And when I said that out loud to him, all of these scripture verses and like all of just like the relationship that I think that God wants to have with us is like, son, if you just listen and obey, this world is yours, man. Like my original design was for you and I to be in fellowship with each other every day. And I gave you dominion over the entire world for you to be free. I was like, I started kind of tearing up a little bit. Like I was like, I'm like sitting there talking to Jacob, and I'm not even like, but then all of this like just started, this imagery just started coming through. And I think that's been one of like the craziest experiences for me as a dad is all of these biblical concepts of how God wants to have relationship with us. I see it and I feel it.
Oh,
like,
sure.
Firsthand.
Happens to me all the time. Happens to me, but there's so many things.
What's an exact like share with like an
sure.
exact feeling that you've seen. Yeah.
Story like that.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Where you feel like that imagery that you just saw.
I mean, there was a couple of weeks ago, Thaddeus was crawling in the living room, or not Thaddeus, Thatcher. Thaddeus doesn't crawl anymore. Thatcher was crawling in the living room, and there was a measuring cup in there. Don't ask me why there's a measuring cup in the living room, but there was a measuring cup in the living room.
Somebody had to measure something.
Yeah. And so he picks up this measuring cup and he sticks the handle in his mouth. Okay.
Okay.
Like, kind of like down his throat, and he chokes, and it kind of like gags, or like it hurts him,
Yeah.
and he starts to just cry, and then so like he stops crying. You know what he does right afterwards? He grabs the measuring cup, he puts it back into his mouth, and he hurts himself, and he starts to cry. But it made me think, like, I was like, that's exactly what we do to God sometimes, in the sense of like, because I told him, I was like, don't do this. I was like, that's not, I was like, take it out of your mouth. Don't do it. It's going to hurt you. And then he does it right afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's like, God's like, how many times have I told you not to do this? It's in the scripture. It's going to cause you pain. It's going to cause you hurt. If you don't do this, you won't be hurt. And there's so many times where I'm like, okay, you get hurt. And then you just pick it up and you do it again.
Yeah.
Out of habit, out of whatever. And it made me think, like, God wants us to be joyful. He doesn't want us to, he doesn't want us to cause self-inflicted pain on ourselves.
Yeah.
But we do it all the time.
Yeah.
We pick up things that aren't healthy for us. We pick up things that are maybe, an attitude, or just things. And God's like, listen, I've already told you to stop this. It's already in the scripture.
Yeah.
And you've already done it once. You've already caused pain, and I've brought you out of it. And I've already told you not to do it, but then you do it again.
Yeah.
So it's like, those are like, and there's just a lot of little things that you're, if you're a Christian and you're walking with God, you will see a lot of those similarities. It's, those things, like you said, that like you look back at God's like, no, this is what I've been trying to teach you for forever. You know what I mean?
Another piece of it too for me was understanding, and now I'm not trying to compare myself to God.
It's always like, whenever you try to make analogies like this, you're like, okay, it's a little different because God is God and I'm just this human father, but there's something there. I understand.
What I've felt was, in my life, there's a lot of things that happened that when I looked back at them, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would that have to happen?
Oh,
right?
sure.
Like, if God is all loving and all powerful, like, why would that have to happen? And why would it have to happen that way? Right. And then I became a dad, and it's like, I'm trying to create an environment where my son can explore, right? He can experience life. Well, in that freedom, he face plants. You know what I mean? Like, he trips.
And you see it before it even happens.
Yeah.
And
if I'm close enough, you know what I mean? I'm there. You know what I mean? Like the whole dad grab. You know what I mean? I got the baby. I got him before his face slapped the concrete. You know what I mean? Or something like that, right? But it's like, I see that too. It's like, well, that was not maybe, right? Like, I can't speak for God, right? But like, to me, it helped answer some questions. That it was like, it wasn't that it was like it had to happen that way. It was that it happened that way for me to be able to learn and grow through that.
Sure.
And those challenges should be embraced, not looked at from why. Instead, look at, okay, what can I learn from it?
Oh, yeah. That should always be it's funny. Our pastor's going to preach a sermon tomorrow, and he talked about it yesterday in group, or Thursday in group, and he said, stop asking why, but, ask, how, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or what do you want me to learn from it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. What am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed, how can I be a good steward of this situation?
What are you trying to teach me in this moment? But no, that's good.
I think, and this has always been like one of my favorite things when somebody asks me for like a tip, just some advice that might save their life, right? And my response is always like, don't eat the yellow snow, because I think that can be a life-saving, tip, right? And it's
for your child,
advice, right? Yeah, and just in general, like even as an adult, like you probably shouldn't eat the yellow snow, and when you think of, and this could be maybe some advice that you got from, a parent, any kind of like instructions or things that somebody shared with you when you were younger that you've held on to, and you could even maybe say that have helped shape a part of your character? Anything, and you can.
Sure. I mean, does it have to be when I was younger?
No.
So here's something that
I guess the thought process behind the question is, like, was there any instructions or advice that were ever given to you
Sure.
that you can say helped change a direction in your life?
So here, okay, a direction. So I had something. I'll say what I had in my mind until you said change my direction.
Okay.
But like this is something I try to live by that I fail at every day. Is just because you can live with it doesn't make it right.
I mean, well, because you can live with something, but it could be torture. Like, it could be hell.
And it could be just in the smallest things. Well, like, sure. I think he was talking for me. It was like I didn't have a hubcap on my tire or something. You know, just as something like as small or like, because one of my biggest problems and this is where we conflict with me and Laura, is that like I can live with, like, I can have my car dirty. Let's just say that I can have my car dirty. It doesn't even matter because I'm the only one getting in. It's not the car. It's not stopping me from driving the car. But when someone gets in, then I have to clean it because they have to get in the car. And that's the only time it's so like. But just because I can live with it that way doesn't make it right. And just in the smallest things. Sure. So that I'm not saying that changed the direction of my life, but it makes me think about it a lot because there's a lot of things that I can live with that probably isn't correct in a sense of like, you know, how we should live our life.
Sure.
So,
sure.
But to your other question, to changing a direction of my life, I mean, I guess someone telling me about Jesus and accepting Jesus, that was definitely changing the direction of my life.
Okay.
I mean, that changed everything. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting right here if I didn't accept Jesus in my life. But, man, I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, I've been just like, when I started like thinking through today, you know, in like this episode, it was like I was also trying to think of, you know, like, because hear the instruction of thy father, you know what I mean? It's kind of what I was like just really pondering. And it was like, what are some things that my dad said to me that, you know, were instructions that, like, you know, I could try to create, you know, in my life, or I'm sorry, I'm coming to a lack of words on how to describe that, but one of the things that I used to do for my dad, and he would pay me $0.25 per shoe, was I would shine his shoes. I would polish them and shine them. He was a salesman.
Okay.
And so, you know, and he told me, he was like, you know, basically like the condition that your shoes are in is says a lot about you.
Sure.
Basically, right? And you know, I don't wear shoes that I shine anymore, really, you know.
I hate shining shoes.
Yeah, they're not comfortable, right? But that kind of like it overflowed into other aspects of my life of like, you know, it might not be the most expensive thing that you have, but the way that you take care of stuff, right? How well you take care of it says a lot about you. Being a good steward, essentially, really was what my dad was, you know, trying to show me, was that, hey, like, you know, if you have something, take good care of it, right? Shine your shoes, make them look good, you know, even if they don't necessarily have to be crazy expensive shoes, but shine them, you know, get them looking good. It says a lot about you. And I think that was something that I really
take care of the small things and go with the bigger things.
You know, try, exactly. I tried to be, you know, clean and meticulous, detail oriented. And that has served me in every like role I've ever worked in my entire life. That instruction of being, you know, clean, detail oriented, right? I can remember my dad making me reshine shoes that weren't shiny enough, right? Like, so, you know, there was just that little action helped, I think, shaped an aspect of who I am as a person today. Was there anything that any advice that somebody gave you that or instructions that somebody gave you that you tried and you failed at whatever it was that you were trying?
So just man, I have to think about that. But I was sitting and listening to you say your dad. So like, if you're listening to this, it's funny because you're coming from a perspective of like everything that you're learning is from your dad.
Sure.
And I didn't have a dad.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this and you're like, man, I didn't even have a dad. I understand where you're coming from. So my real dad, yeah. So I'm trying to think, because most of my life, I mean, I probably had a lot of people tell me stuff that I just was like, whatever, because I didn't have a father figure in my life. I had a stepdad for a little while, but there was nothing healthy about that. But man, I don't know advice that I was given that I tried and I failed at. Is that the...
Yeah. Just to give an example, it's not even necessarily something terribly deep, right? But I can remember a time my friend and we were doing cliff diving, and it wasn't even it was like maybe 25 feet. And this kid, man, he was my best friend growing up. And he could always pull stuff off. He was extremely athletic, very acrobatic, just great coordination. Just drove me absolutely mad because he'd go jump off of a cliff, do a backflip, land it perfectly. I would, and very similar build to me, right? Like we were both we were always competing to try to keep up and athletically, right? And I would go to try to do the same exact thing and belly flop or back flop or just completely just nothing like the way that he did it, right? And so that's just an example that comes to my mind of some advice or instruction that did not serve me well. When I was 18 when I moved to Florida, and my parents were very much they were we don't know if this is a good move for you. And initially, when I moved down there, we were, the conversations that I had with my parents was that I was only going to go down there for 6 months and then I would be back. I just wanted to go down there and dance. And, 6 months came and went and I never came home. It was 5 years later when I finally came home. But, wow. There was certain aspects of my life down there that if it hadn't have been for the upbringing that I had, I could have gotten very lost, I think. But because of the instructions of my father, the law of my mother, there were certain things that were just a part of who I was, my character.
Yeah.
Right? That didn't allow me to go down certain roads. Now, I made a lot of stupid decisions, a lot of,
sure,
things that I learned a lot about myself through, but there was a couple of people that I probably shouldn't have been listening to their advice because it was kind of skewed. And it wasn't really what was best for me. It was more or less what was best for the situation, if that makes sense. And so, and ultimately, I probably should have never really moved to Florida when I look back at it.
I mean, your parents were right.
They probably were closer to being right. And this is what, this is the crazy part, right? So we just had all this conversation about intentionality, about, having a focused life for your child, right? Getting them plugged into something, and then that becomes their life, that becomes their upbringing, right? If I would have applied that to my life, specifically with dance, and that would have been my number one focus, and I would have been, eat, breathe, sleep, dance,
sure,
right? My career would have been in a completely different world.
Oh, sure.
But I was split between so many things growing up to where there was dance, there was construction, there was girls, right? There was, my studies, which that kind of is a given, right? That should have been there anyways, right?
Girls and studies.
Yeah. And what's even crazy about that too, though, is looking back, girls played a huge factor in my life that they probably should have never been. And this is where the advice of our parents so this is more of my example of something that my dad taught me my entire childhood, young adulthood, was find a woman, get married. Like everything, like all throughout our days, it was all about find a woman and get married. So when I was 18 and I'm, living on my own in Florida, I'm trying to find a woman and get married. And it was like almost any woman would do, right? But in reality, like I am not compatible with just any woman. You know what I mean? Like and vice versa, right?
It's the way it is.
It is the way that it is, right? But that advice was, I think, very harmful for me because I was so focused on that relationship when I needed to have been more focused on my relationship with God.
Oh, 100%.
Because I think that the woman would have naturally been brought into my life if my focus would have been there.
Oh yeah,
Right?
100%.
So that's just like an example of something that my dad also taught me, though, that potentially also had some negative side effects in my life. Now, there's so many studies that have been done, though, that show that if a man gets married at a younger age, there was I had read this, and I think I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like Dave Ramsey's, one of his organizations is, I believe I was actually watching one of the podcasts, and this is where this information came from. And he was basically talking about how in a man, if he gets married by the age of 21 and starts having children, statistically, his wealth at the end of a 25-year period is higher than a guy that maybe, didn't get married as young, didn't have children as young, maybe never married, right? A guy that gets focused, basically, right?
Sure.
Gets some responsibility in his life, his trajectory increases,
That makes sense. 'Cause
right?
you're-
His capacity.
You're trying to save money for your future because once you do get married and you start having kids, your main focus is how am I going to provide?
Yeah.
And you start thinking about a house. You start thinking
Yeah.
about cars. You start thinking about things that are going to be. Whereas if you're, I mean, and again, it's not the same for everybody, but the majority probably you're not married. You're just spending money. You're living paycheck to paycheck because
Potentially.
you're buying things that are going to be useless to you in 3 years. You're going to have a hobby that.
Yep.
And then I'm not saying those things are inherently wrong, but you're not thinking future.
Yeah.
You're thinking now.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense.
I started drinking Starbucks coffee when I was like probably 10 years old, 11 years old, right?
They've been around that long? I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
They've been around for a while.
Yeah.
And and I'm not that old, okay? But if I tallied up the amount of money that I've spent at a Starbucks,
You probably buy a Starbucks.
Yes, it would
Probably
be
start a franchise
it would
of
be
a Starbucks.
nauseating how much money I have spent at a Starbucks, right? And it's just that it goes back to my question that I posed to the audience of: is it better to live a focused life where Starbucks is not a factor, right? Like
If it doesn't
coffee.
fit, if it doesn't fit in your direction, then get rid of it.
Yeah, it doesn't serve you, right?
Sure.
Coffee is one of those things that my dad, from the second he woke up, it was like,
I need a coffee.
I need coffee. I can't think. Oh, don't talk to me. I haven't had my coffee yet, right? Like that's the house that I was raised in. And so that's another thing to think about when it's like the things that we learn from our parents, the things that we take into our child's upbringing, right? Just even coffee. And then the effect that could potentially have on that child's life, right? Little things.
The
things
responsibility that a dad has, it's an everyday.
is amazing.
It
is amazing.
It is amazing.
But
it's also like, I mean, even when you have kids, it's just if you have kids, for a man, for a woman, it's that responsibility. The ways, if you really care about your children, like I see, and there's a lot of people who don't, that are just making decisions for themselves. But when you really start thinking about your children, you start living life a little bit differently.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Life isn't about 100% about you anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying that it means that you can't enjoy things and you can't do things, but if you're making decisions that are potentially harmful to your child and to your family, like you shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't be doing them.
Or there should be a really good reason.
I don't know if there's ever, yeah.
That this is like it didn't turn into a harmful situation, right? But it could have. So there was a time that we had just come back from the Feast of Tabernacles, And for anybody that doesn't know about the Feast of Tabernacles, it's basically a festival in the Bible where in memorial of the children of Israel being freed from Egypt's bondage, we celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles to remember their wandering in the desert. And so we had just gotten back from that, and it was like 8 days of our entire church basically camping all together, eating together, like, campfires every night, praise and worship all the time. Like, I mean, it was just like community for 8 days, and you definitely got into like an ecosystem that everybody was believers. So it was like, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't hear music certain music, you didn't really, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't hear cussing, like, it was like you got used to this, like, just sphere of where everybody was and how everybody was socializing, right? So we leave that. We had just left the Feast of Tabernacles, and we're at a gas station. And this car pulls right up next to us, and this song that the guy's playing is like, he's got all of his windows down, and it is just blasting. It's like every other word is just a curse word.
Sure.
And my dad lost it. And he's like, starts yelling at the guy, because he's like, hey, like, I have my kids here. He's got 3 kids. My dad had 3 kids in the car with us at that time, and we were all kind of in shell shock, like, just like, oh my God, like, this is so intense, these just coming from, the Feast of Tabernacles to that. And, in the gas station, like, my dad almost got in a fight. And it's like he was trying to make a point that I think was, admirable, right? In trying to protect his family from those words, from that influence. But he could have potentially brought, like, who knows if that guy was like carrying a gun or something, you know what I mean?
It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. Sure. And there was definitely times that my dad, I think, lost sight of that and potentially put us in harm's way based off of a decision trying to do, I think, what he thought was right.
Sure.
Which is another thing to learn from. So.
Definitely a learning process. Well, episode 2.
Episode 2.
If you were gonna, what I was trying to think, like, how do we end episodes? Should we always end in a wrap-up thought?
Are we always going to have wrap-up thoughts, though?
If you made it to the end of the episode.
If you've made it here so far.
If you made it to the end of the episode.
Our wrap-up
is, we understand the struggle is, it's an ongoing, there's not a right way. There's a lot of wrong ways. Yeah. But
you only fail if you quit.
And you're not alone.
You're not.
You're not alone.
Nope.
I mean, yeah, you're not alone. There's the wrap-up thought.
That's the wrap-up thought. You are not alone.
We'll see you next episode. Peace out.